The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Over the past 2 weeks, we've had a poll here and a poll there that showed Bernie Sanders closing in on Hillary Clinton, or one poll showing them tied, or maybe he's tightening the race, but the average of polls still shows Hillary Clinton way ahead. We now have a situation where we have Hillary Clinton only 5 points ahead of Bernie Sanders, not in one particular poll, but in an average of all recent polls considered by the Real Clear Politics average. Let's take a look at some of the recent polling data and that average. And you'll notice going from a Fox News poll, which actually has Bernie Sanders ahead 3 points, and we sort of have to question how much we can trust that. An NBC Wall Street Journal poll, which has Hillary Clinton up 11. And as I mentioned earlier and last week, a USA Today poll and separately a Quinnipiac poll, each of which have Hillary Clinton up only 2 points within the margin of error. You will see that in a Real Clear Politics average of recent polls, Hillary Clinton is averaging 47.6% support and Bernie Sanders is averaging 42% support, putting Clinton ahead of Bernie nationally by somewhere between 5 and 6 points, of course, considering a general sort of 3 to 4% margin of error. Now, let's be very, very realistic and pragmatic and clear here, Lewis. The reality is, with just two candidates, and remember, 47 up plus 42 adds up to 89. That leaves 11% that are either undecided or supporting someone else on paper right now that will ultimately have to come to one or the other, most likely. Although some people might vote empty ballots, hypothetically, not very common. A 5-point deficit for Bernie Sanders means he will not be the nominee, right? We have only two candidates here. If Hillary Clinton can continue getting not 47 to 42 victories, because that leaves 11% out there somewhere, but as she did in Nevada, 52 to 47 victories, once you account for those undecideds, she is going to win. That's just the reality. So as far as Bernie Sanders has come, he came from 40 points back in Nevada to lose by only 5 percentage points. Basic math, right? Not my opinion, not the opinion of Lewis, not my assessment of what I would like to see happen or whatever. Statistically speaking, especially once we get to the winner-take-all states, Hillary Clinton, with a 5-point edge over Bernie Sanders, gets this nomination. That is a mathematical reality, unless Bernie Sanders can go above and beyond and actually surpass Hillary's lead in a number of these upcoming states.
Right. So what we don't have is a poll from every state a day or two before they actually go to the polls.
Right. Although we will, over the next week, have a lot of those polls and a lot of those states going to vote.
And if Bernie does the same thing he did in the first two, well, maybe, well, I should say not the first two, the first and the third. We'll see. Maybe that number will change.
Let's talk about the next primary that the Democrats have, which is South Carolina. Hillary Clinton remains ahead by somewhere between 22 and 26 points. And this is an average of recent polls. The closest poll from South Carolina over the last week has Bernie Sanders down 18 points in South Carolina. Some polls over the last week have Bernie Sanders down as much as 29 points in South Carolina. This is absolutely a key race. It is very possible that Bernie Sanders is going to close this gap in the days remaining before this election, but this really is a key state at this point, Lewis, because by staying close so far, there is no question whatsoever that the Bernie Sanders movement is a huge movement. It is a legitimate movement. It is doing huge things against the Hillary Clinton establishment campaign. But things are going to change very, very quickly if Bernie Sanders does end up losing by even 15 points, even 12 points in South Carolina. And then with March 1st, Super Tuesday next week, where we will have all sorts of states voting, we will have a lot of information, Lewis, 9 days from today about who is going to be the Democratic nominee.
Very exciting. I think, Dave, that that God is just going to pick Bernie Sanders.
You think so?
No, I don't know.
We will see.
Yeah.
We will have data for you over the next... Every day that there's elections, we'll be with you on the delegate math and everything that you need to know. So don't worry about that. I know Lewis was getting a little worried this morning that we weren't going to have that data, but trust me, we will. Last week, I told you about this super awkward moment on MSNBC when Donald Trump thanked the hosts of Morning Joe, Mika, Brzezinski, and former Republican Congressman Joe Scarborough, for their support. And they went into a panic, looking at each other and talking over each other, just frantically trying to distance themselves from that comment. And now there's leaked audio from Harry Shearer, the comedian and voice actor Harry Shearer of Simpsons fame, which it's not clear exactly how he got his hands on it. And it's off-air conversation between Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski, and Donald Trump. And the claim is, listen to how buddy-buddy they are. Let's take a listen to some of this audio here.
What do you have after this?
I make a speech, get on a plane, make a speech. I'm working.
Well, I tell you what, the Bloomberg poll, all the polls out today look great in South Carolina. All of them.
Yeah. Well, let's see. But I'm being hit. They're spending $75 million on negative ads on me over the last 2 weeks.
Right.
Are they catching on at all?
No.
What do you think? Are they catching on?
No.
They're vicious. They're spending a tremendous amount on negative ads on me.
No. You know what I thought was the kind of wow moment was the guy you brought up on stage.
Yeah, that was good.
We played it several times this morning.
We played it up against Obama.
The both guys.
Both guys.
Oh, it is. We played Obama first.
The young guy
and
was
then we
champ.
played the guys.
I saw it. I watched your show this morning. You have me almost as a legendary figure. I like that.
No, I tell you, this morning, what we basically said today was we were completely wrong about the
Totally.
debate. Yeah.
I thought
I did really well on the debate show, I have to tell you.
I didn't. Yes, Alan?
3 viewer questions.
You did not, right?
Oh my God, I was like, he's melting.
Yeah. I have to say, they go on to talk about possible questions that they're going to ask Trump, and Trump hears the questions that are coming and all this stuff. Whatever this means about the cozy relationship that seems to exist between mostly Donald Trump and Joe Scarborough, but sort of by association, Mika Brzezinski as well, this actually, I hate to admit it, Lewis, it improves my opinion of Trump. Because this is Trump, right? This is the exact same Trump talking about how he likes being portrayed as this legendary figure on their show and talking about polls and talking about elections and all this stuff. It's the exact same Trump that you see on the campaign stages, right? The rally stages. And in some way, it just tells me Trump isn't really putting on a show during his rallies. Now, you might hate the person that Trump is during his rallies, and it's the same person that he seems to be off-air with Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough, but there is no on-air and off-air Trump, seemingly. I mean, believe me, I'm not a supporter of Trump. I'm not anywhere closer to being a supporter of Trump after hearing this, but there's something kind of nice about the fact that this is Trump. This is the dude.
I agree. Yeah, I think he still might exaggerate things a bit when he's in campaign mode.
And his political positions that his campaign is based around, I don't believe for a second are Trump's actual positions. There's no reason to think Trump is all of a sudden, because of religion, super anti-choice. I mean, we've talked about that before. But with regard to his sort of demeanor and whatnot, this is the guy, right? I mean, this is who you're getting. I think he would be a disastrous president, and I don't think he will be president. But there was something about this clip that, aside from the obvious critique of this cozy relationship that exists, I was like, it's Trump.
Seems kind of down to earth.
What can I say about the guy?
Yeah. I mean, and I wouldn't dig too much into the whole buddy thing. This is pretty normal chit chat for what's going on when the cameras aren't rolling.
Yeah, I mean, when we've had people on and there's sort of time before, I mean, if somebody just listened to a couple minutes of it, I don't think there's anyone we've ever interviewed where it would sound like we really don't like them or are at odds with them. And I don't think it would necessarily be evidence of any particularly cozy or adversarial relationship or whatever. I mean, generally just people are nice to each other off air, and that's sort of it.
Yeah, that's it. So it's really not interesting in that way, but it is interesting to hear Trump just sounding like himself, like a normal dude. And you know what? I wouldn't mind getting a beer with Trump, right? I mean, it probably wouldn't be that bad.
It would be, if it's anything like when he ordered his steak well done or stacked 2 pieces of pizza on top of each other and ate them with a fork and knife, I don't know how the guy would drink a beer, but it would be compelling.
Well, don't get me wrong. If he orders a Yingling, I'm out of
there. Lewis is going to be called an elitist for that. Every time he criticizes anything like that, the emails pour in.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
Just let me say, I got sick off Yingling once.
Yeah,
and
but
that's
you love
why
it. Yeah.
Okay, Yingling.
Very good. The FCC has ruled that you can get your cable TV programming through devices other than the cable boxes offered by your cable company. This means that instead of renting the box from Comcast, for example, you could add a Comcast subscription to your Apple TV or Roku box. You would still pay the subscription fee, but you wouldn't pay the rental fee for the box. This is not a done deal, but hopefully it's a step in the direction of increasing competition, of which there's very, very little in the cable world, at least to some degree. And we've reported in the past, a lot of people don't know, you're already allowed to buy your cable box instead of renting your cable box. But it's not quite so simple. It's more limited than literally adding your cable subscription to something like Roku. So at its core, Lewis, this is a very, very good thing and a great decision.
Yeah, it's a victory. It's a small victory. I think that there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, we still can't even, it's still a bundled package. The prices are still completely inflated, probably because these companies, they're monopolies, really.
Yeah, and we've reported on the cord cutting that's been going on. We've talked about people canceling cable. And while it isn't overwhelming numbers, it's clearly been enough to get some action from the big cable providers, most of which have some of the worst customer service reputations around. There's original content being created by Netflix and Amazon, and this has also helped it has also hurt the standard legacy cable companies. And it's not that Netflix and Apple aren't big corporate America, right? I mean, for people who say, I'm against big corporations controlling our content, I really like Apple and Amazon and Netflix. Those are huge, huge corporations, but they are new guard versus old guard. It's more new money versus old money. And there is definitely something there. Now, what we have to remember, Lewis, is you know how these things can work. And I don't know yet, because this hasn't been made a 100% reality. If you say, okay, I'm going to buy my box, I'm going to use my Roku box to get my Comcast programming. Comcast says, fantastic. You're now saving $10 a month because you're not renting a box from us. And we have something called the freedom from the box fee, where you don't use our box, and that carries an $8 charge, for example, or whatever. Hopefully, the way the legislation is ultimately written or the ruling is issued will prevent the cable companies from saying, sure, you save the $10, but then you pay 8 or 10 or 12 because you're not using our box. I'm hopeful, Lewis, that this is something the FCC has thought about.
I'm sure they're thinking about it. Well, whether or not they can act on it is another matter.
Yeah.
And my advice to people would be cut the cord. Cut the cord right now.
You haven't had cable for a long time.
I can't remember the last time I had cable.
And you still survive. You're able to get all your cooking done, and you know about what's going on and all that stuff.
I have an antenna,
right,
and I can get some channels that way.
Mm-hmm.
I can watch football.
Right.
And I have Netflix, and that's all I need. I mean,
right.
I don't need to browse through 100 channels and not find anything to watch on them and pay $100 a month to do that. I don't need to do that.
Yeah, Lewis doesn't need to do it. Lewis isn't doing it, and Lewis will not do it no matter what you say, unless you make a really compelling argument to him, I guess, on Twitter. He's on Twitter at Lewis Motamedy, and I'm on Twitter at DPackman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show is funded directly by our viewers and podcast listeners and radio listeners and YouTube subscribers, etc. Today's new member of the day is James Cottam. James, thank you so much for signing up at davidpakman.com/membership. As a member, James gets instant access to all of the exclusive member benefits, including the commercial-free audio feed of the show, the commercial-free video feed of the show, the archives of the show dating all the way back to the very beginning when the show was a really embarrassing mess, more so than it is now, and the world-famous bonus show hosted by producer Lewis. Join James and sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Lewis, did you hear, well, obviously you heard, I mean, you were here that day. A week or two ago, I told you that Cliven Bundy, Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, was arrested on his way to the location in Oregon of that armed occupation in which his son was actually involved and ultimately arrested. The latest news, and this happened a couple of days ago, we just have been so busy with other news we haven't gotten to it. Cliven Bundy has been indicted by a grand jury with charges of conspiracy, assault on a federal officer, and obstruction of justice. This is all related not to the armed occupation that his kids were involved in, but to that 2014 standoff, Lewis, that we talked about with the Bureau of Land Management. Cliven Bundy and 4 other people have been indicted on 16 different felony charges. Should we be glad, Lewis, that there was eventually an indictment? Or should we be shocked that after facing down Bureau of Land Management federal officials with guns, it took over a year and a half to even get an indictment? I don't know whether I should feel happy or be absolutely distraught over how this guy was able to get away with this for so long. Well, not to mention the 20 years of refusing to pay the fees.
That's true. I guess we can be happy that there was an arrest and now an indictment without an exchange of gunfire,
right,
and deaths and all of that violence. I guess that's a good thing.
Hypothetically, the charge of assault on a federal officer carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. And if convicted, the defendants would also have to forfeit at least $3 million worth of property that they've secured through these crimes, according to the statement made by officials. This is the law, right? I mean, you can't just opt out of pieces of the law that you don't like. And I don't know if this is an irony or a double standard, but one of the most enjoyable parts of this is how these guys scream, the government doesn't have authority. And now they're being taken to jail and charged by that same government they claim has absolutely no authority over them. Clearly, the government is exercising some authority over them, even if it took decades to do, Lewis.
Yep, and they'll say that it's all being done illegally.
Right.
So be it. I don't think that's going to prevent Bundy from being behind bars.
No requests for snacks so far, right? I mean, we talked about how his son and those co-occupiers in Oregon were requesting all sorts of snacks be sent to them. Reportedly, Cliven Bundy and his 4 co-conspirators have not requested any snacks so far. He is kind of arrogant, right? I mean, it's sort of arrogant to think that the feds are just going to let him fly into Oregon and do absolutely whatever he pleases. He's been on their radar for years at this point after that armed a defense, even though defense doesn't really feel like the right term. I would be very curious to see the look on his face when he's told, not only are you under arrest, we're also indicting you. And I don't know if there is video of that, but that's video I would pay for.
That would be some good video. Yeah, I think, I guess he just thought that they weren't paying attention to him anymore, that he wasn't on their radar. I guess he had 1,000 eyes on him, Dave.
Rick Wiles is a so-called end times pastor. We've spoken about him before. He's the type of guy who thinks Jesus is coming back any day now. President Obama's the Antichrist, that type of thing. Now, as a reminder, he's the one who said someone was going to die due to gay marriage. He's the guy who promotes the buying of horses and bulk grains and all sorts of stuff off of which he makes money to prepare for the end times. And he is now jumping into the conspiracy theories about the passing of conservative Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, which we covered last week. The details are as follows, and we're going to play the audio here of Rick Wiles explaining it. He is basically saying that President Obama was involved in a conspiracy to kill Antonin Scalia. And I just really like it, Lewis, when someone can fully commit to some crazy level of insanity. He's going the numerology route, saying that there's numbers at play that prove Obama's behind it. Let's take a listen here.
The possible occult connections to this?
We didn't mention it. I actually think you're going to talk a little bit with Steve Carell coming up here with it. But in short, Lupercalia began on February 13th.
What is that?
It's an ancient celebration that people date back to Rome, where people come together and they sacrifice dogs, goats, and they do a bunch of crazy stuff with women. It's a fertility festival.
This is an ancient pagan day. And when was it?
February 13th was the beginning of it. February 13th to the 15th.
Which was the day he died?
Yes.
Okay, the other thing, and I noticed this, the 13th was the 44th day of 2016.
Right.
Obama is the 44th president of the United States. So you have this numerology thing taking place. Remember Christine Lagarde dropped the zeros? Remember that speech she gave last year or so?
Yeah.
Drop the zeros, click your heels, spin around, all that. weird.
Okay. I think that's good. It's long. We don't have to play the whole thing, but he later went on to conclude that President Obama had killed Antonin Scalia and deliberately left that pillow that was reportedly found on Antonin Scalia's face as a message to everybody else not to mess with Obama. I'm convinced, Lewis. I mean, 44th day of 2016, and President Obama's the 44th president. I would actually go further. President Obama is responsible for the death of everyone who died on that particular day, which is a lot of people, by the way.
A lot of people. This reminds me of the whole Herman Cain numerology thing.
Yeah.
And you can find numbers and coincidences with numbers anywhere if you really want to find them.
I mean, think, Lewis, Rick Wiles has 5 letters in his last name, and it takes 5 letters to spell the word crazy. I think we really need to look into that. There's something to that. It's very, very suspicious. And it's really to be commended to the United States as a sort of country that people like Rick Wiles are allowed to not only walk around, but have television and radio programs where they talk about this stuff. Here I thought numerology was one of those practices condemned by their Bible along with witchcraft, but clearly it is alive and well, and Rick Wiles is going fully in favor of that.
I'm not sure numerology was really a thing when those guys wrote the Bible.
Right.
Maybe it just probably wasn't on their radar, and there were bigger things to worry about back then.
Right away, more tax breaks for this guy's ministry. That's clearly what we need. All right, well, we'll take a break. If you want to talk about this story or any others on our Facebook page with us, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. And we also have a Reddit discussion forum where you can join us. A lot of activity, Lewis. There's actually a really good thread on Reddit with all of these different David Pakman Show related memes that have surfaced over time. People have been putting them together in one thread on Reddit. And you can pull that up at davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Brian Manowitz, known to those who know him as the vegan black metal chef. Brian, let's start with the sort of simplest question first. How long have you been vegan and why?
Well, greetings, listeners of the David Pakman Show and watchers. I've been vegan for about 15 or so years. And the fast answer I tell people is I don't believe in the exploitation of animals.
And talk about what that means to you in terms of veganism, vegetarianism, etc. Is there any scenario in which animal products are consumed that wouldn't be exploitation to you? Or is any consumption of animal products whatsoever exploitative in your mind?
Well, I believe as we were talking earlier, quite some time ago, I believe you had mentioned something like if someone if it was some native tribe somewhere that was living just off the land, and something like that, would that be considered exploitation of animals? And to that, I say no. If it was some any of the very few still existing native tribes that just live off the land, I'm not talking to them. Quite honestly, I'm just talking to the citied world that, and especially sort of the first world, of which I'm not sure if the U.S. is a part of anymore or not, but mostly the citied world, and even sort of rural city world. But yeah, but the people in what we would consider relatively normal circumstances.
So it sounds like, if I understand correctly, part of whether animal consumption, either of animal meat or animal products, whether it's exploitative in your mind, depends on sort of the life situation of those who might be consuming the animals in terms of the alternatives they have. Am I understanding that?
Yeah, in one sense, yes. I mean, you can only take the ivory tower so far, in the sense that that at some point, really the basics of veganism is these animals that we consume and that we use are living their life in utter hell, basically for our benefit, which is not needed. And so that's really the bottom line of everything, is we want to cut out that whole these animals living in utter hell, and the best part of their life is their death. So there might be some fringe circumstances about this or that, but it's really not important in the big scheme of things.
I'm curious, though, if you hold that or believe that, taking an animal that didn't necessarily choose to be born, it also certainly didn't choose to be used for food or for its products to be taken by humans for consumption. And you say, well, in the city, it's exploitative to do this to the animal, but in a rural place, it isn't. It might be hard for some people to sort of understand if you believe that morally, if the animal doesn't have a say in the matter, it's exploitation. Why is it not exploitation merely because humans might be living in an area where they have fewer alternatives? I'm trying to understand the sort of consistency of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when I say rural, I don't honestly mean like rural America.
No, I get it.
Yeah, it's still quite... I'm talking about if you're some kind of native tribe, if you're an Eskimo, there's zero vegetation around, then and that's what you live off the land, then yeah, if that's what you absolutely have to do to survive, then yeah, I don't have a problem with it, because ultimately there's sort of two sides of it. There's sort of the moral side, which is sort of what I'm talking about here, and then there's also the ultimate, the relative sense, in that moral actions have consequences, and the ultimate sense in that there essentially are no morals. So in the ultimate sense, that's what I'm talking about with these native tribes, is that there really is no moral aspect here. They're doing what they need to do to survive, just like the rest of nature. They're living in nature. I'm curious
though, because if you go back before the agricultural revolution, for example, where humans said, hey, you know what, instead of sort of being nomadic and having a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, we're going to settle down here and grow and depend on wheat or whatever it is. Prior to that, when humans were nomadic and sort of hunter-gatherers, their meat consumption in many cases was mostly the leftover animals that some larger, stronger predator had killed. And otherwise, they were mostly eating berries and what could be found naturally, right? Plants, vegetables, etc. So is it even a good argument to say that you make exceptions now for those who are in these native areas, when even when we go back pre-agricultural revolution, excuse me, we still had a lot of humans that were able to get by without certainly killing meat, if not eating it at all? Doesn't it sound a little bit strange to make the argument out of necessity now when we have examples of non-meat eaters from so long ago?
Well, here's the thing. It doesn't even cross my mind, because it doesn't even matter. Like, we're talking about so few people and such a nothing in the grand scheme of things that it's totally off the point. It literally doesn't matter. In terms of all the other benefits of veganism to the planet, to society, and everything else, those fringe cases don't matter.
They don't matter to you anyway.
Yeah, they don't matter to me.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough.
It's complete that completely misses the point of the greater aspect of it.
Okay, a couple other things I want to touch on with you. Number one, you talked about the sort of environmental benefit of veganism. In my research, it seems the real environmental benefit is in the reduction of meat consumption, particularly red meat and a few other specific types of meat. Do you agree that in terms of health, there's no evidence that veganism versus, for example, the Mediterranean diet, which limits meat consumption, is healthier? There, in all the research I've done, there's no truly extensive, all-encompassing study that says that a vegan diet is healthier.
Yeah, well, for one, I've not done extensive research on. I've not read every study on PubMed about health benefits or not health benefits with the vegan diet. Quite honestly, I don't think that many studies have been done on the vegan diet, especially very large-scale studies like things with like the Mediterranean diet. In terms of what's the greatest benefit for the planet. Was that what you said before?
Yeah, well, no, I was just sort of seeing if we were on the same page, that there's no doubt that reducing meat consumption is good environmentally, but that in terms of human health, there's no evidence that says veganism is the healthiest diet.
Well, healthiest is kind of, well, like to me, health is kind of a continuum. It's not this is healthy versus this is unhealthy.
Right.
It's more like is healthier than this, is healthier than that. I mean, I guess you could probably say that a raw fruit or vegetable might be considered maybe the healthiest thing. But again, that's still a little bit arbitrary because there's different circumstances.
Sure.
But even regardless, though, quite honestly, I don't cite studies in my thing in any of my things that I write or things that I talk about. Even though I have a science background, I studied behavioral neuroscience in school.
Yeah.
And worked in a research lab, and we discussed papers around the lab table all the time. And I'm peer-reviewed journals and everything. And I think science is great. I think science has an absolute place. However, I don't talk about it in the grand scheme of things because, for one, anything that requires a statistical analysis to show whether something is more probable or less probable, or essentially whether they're saying this is correct or this is not correct, quite honestly has a tendency to go back and forth throughout the ages.
Sure.
So I'm not even going to go there. What I'm going to go for is what is obvious and what can be shown with no statistical studies whatsoever. It's obvious that animals require much more food that you put into them than you get out of them.
Right.
That's just obvious. That doesn't require a paper, doesn't require a study. You have to feed animals, and especially in our case with factory farms, corn and soybeans and even alfalfa, that requires tremendous amount more resources going into it, be it the actual food that we could be feeding people, be it water that is used for the agriculture and for all the steps involved, the fuel for all the transportation steps involved. There's a whole lot of waste in all these intermediary steps. And that doesn't require any kind of paper or study. That's just obvious. You can see that there is waste and you're getting far less out than what you're putting in.
How far should this be taken with regard to even vegetables, right? I mean, there are vegetables like avocado, which also require disproportionately more water for the nutrients that you get out compared to other particular vegetables. I mean, should the environmental argument even be applied within vegetables? Like, should we get rid of or go away from the vegetables that require more water per nutrient density?
Well, here's the thing. If you got rid of the meat in general, the water wouldn't even be a question because there'd just be enough water.
Fair enough. Okay, let me ask you something about a trend now in veganism that I've been reading about. This is the bivalve veganism, which is the idea that bivalves, right, clams, mussels, mollusks, scallops, etc., they're certainly animals to some extent, but the idea that they're not sentient in any way. And thus, I've increasingly been reading about vegans who say, I'm vegan, but I eat specifically bivalves. I don't eat fish, I don't eat octopus, but bivalves I feel morally okay eating in the same way that a vegetable is alive, but it is not sentient. Where are you on the bivalve debate?
Yeah, so actually I'd only first heard of this, I guess about a year or so ago. Mm-hmm. Didn't even know this was a thing until then. Here's where I'm at. First of all, this is mostly for people that live in the ivory tower. Like again, this is this philosophical. If we just get rid of animal exploitation at the root, then this is not even a question. Well, first of all, bivalves and mollusks and things, they have nerve ganglion. Whether or not you consider those formal brains, I mean, our bodies have nerve ganglion that do lots of subconscious computations for our brain, and they're basically like mini brains. So
you reject the idea that bivalves aren't sentient in some sense.
I think it's even ridiculous to talk about, and
wow.
and yeah, like if I can't believe people are focusing on that as opposed to just getting rid of the exploitation of animals in general.
Well, I guess the question is, are you exploiting a muscle if you determine that it may be no more sentient than a plant, right? If you believe that, then are you really exploiting it?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is where if you focus on fringe cases, the ivory tower breaks down. Like the pure theory, if you want to just go by pure theory of it, then who knows? Quite honestly, pain is an internal phenomenon anyways. You can't really know whether anything experiences pain.
Well, yeah, kind of. But I mean, I think that's a sort of dangerous path to go down, because science does know a lot about pain, right? I mean, I think it would be, I don't know that it's a good argument to say we can't even really know, because then maybe plants feel pain and we shouldn't be exploiting plants.
Well, no, exactly. I mean, but what I'm saying is if you take that argument of well, I don't think it's any more sentient. Why not? I mean, it has nerves. It has nerve ganglion. Why is it like sentience? Of course, is a degree, and again, it's like if we just cut out animal exploitation at the root, that's the core of veganism.
Yeah. Not
weird fringe things.
Hey, do you eat honey?
I do not.
You do not eat honey. All right. Well, do you believe the bees are exploited if we empty the honeycomb?
I do. I think we should leave honey for the bees and leave them well enough alone.
All right. Brian Manowitz, the most hardcore vegan we've ever had on the show, that's for sure. Known to many as the vegan black metal chef. Check him out on YouTube. Google him. Brian, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This is a sort of oddball but interesting story. It appears, based on the medical records that have been increasingly reviewed over the last couple of months, that Adolf Hitler had not only a micropenis and may have had to sit to urinate, but also had only one testicle. A few months ago, it was reported that he had only one testicle, and now there's a new report based on an examination of medical records which suggests that Adolf Hitler also had a deformed micropenis. I mean, Lewis, this is crazy. And he suffered from hypospadias, which, according to historians Jonathan Mayo and Emma Craigie, may have led to him having to sit to urinate. Now, there's disagreement over the micropenis is connected to the hypospadias or separate. But be that as it may, the analysis in general is Hitler was, his urinary function was not normal, as we would say, and certainly his sexual function was not normal. And what's sort of ironic about that is I wouldn't, if you came to me and said, hey, there's a guy who decided to put up the so-called Aryan race, which has distinguishing features that are basically the opposite of what Hitler looks like, right? Number one, and prop them up as sort of like the best path forward in terms of eugenics and all this stuff, and wants to kill all the Jews and gays and all sorts of other groups by brutally rounding them up and putting them on trains and sending them to concentration camps and death camps. My assumption wouldn't be this dude probably has a pretty milquetoast and standard list of sexual desires, right? My assumption would be there's probably something a little bit off with this guy going on in the bedroom. So this is not shocking to me.
Well, I think there's just a lot going, a lot wrong with this guy.
Yeah.
And viewers will notice that Dave and Hitler wear the same shirt. Apart from that, this whole thing, I was wondering if his hatred, his seething hatred for Jews, was a result of a circumcision gone awry, and maybe that's why his penis was deformed.
If you, Lewis, are giving the intactivists any fodder here to start contacting us in a very angry way about circumcision-related things, I am going to be very upset at your mere suggestion of that. And what I will tell you is that British historian Ian Kershaw wrote that Hitler found sexual activity disgusting and that he had an irrational fear of sexually transmitted diseases. So that combined with the micro penis, combined with the possible sitting down to urinate, I mean, it's all painting a very specific picture of Adolf Hitler, isn't it? I mean, what we can learn from this is quite profound.
I suppose it is. There's still a lot of speculation on how this would translate to his behavior, but it is still interesting. Very interesting.
Hitler and Ted Nugent having way more in common than we had ever thought. I mean, we knew they had a bunch of stuff in common, but clearly it's more than we ever even imagined.
I guess so, Dave. Yeah.
I was thinking about, I've been reading a lot of articles recently about the negative effects of smartphones and the sort of constantly connected world. There's concerns about attention spans. There's concerns about people being addicted to being on their phone or feeling very acutely disconnected or isolated whenever they're off their phones. And we know how these fully immersive smartphones can lead to people decreasing actual real-world interpersonal interaction, families where everybody sits at dinner on their phones instead of talking to each other, et cetera, et cetera. And I sort of also started thinking about this trend towards minimalism that exists now. The idea that, hey, you know, we don't really need to, nor do we benefit from this idea of working to have money to buy stuff to use, to then buy more stuff, which means we have to keep working, et cetera, et cetera. In a way, maybe one of the most positive things about smartphone technology, Lewis, is that they do allow for a higher level of minimalism. If you're dissatisfied with the sort of rat race realities of many Westerners making more stuff to buy more money, smartphones really do drastically reduce the amount of stuff you need to own, right? I mean, you can eliminate all of your books if you use your smartphone as a digital reader. You can eliminate your nightstand alarm clock by using the alarm feature on your phone. You can eliminate your watch because your smartphone tells you what time it is. You might even be able to get rid of a laptop if you basically just need to do email and simple tasks. You can do that on your smartphone. There's a very long list, right? Cookbooks, all those cookbooks in your home, those go away. Music CDs, if you still have any. I don't think Lewis does, but some people might. Those can all go away. You don't need a camera anymore. You don't need a calculator. You don't need a GPS. You don't need a map or atlases. When there's new mapping, it just gets updated on your phone. So shouldn't we be seeing this as one of the positive sides, Lewis, of smartphone technology, that you really can simplify your life in a way at some risk, right? Putting so many eggs in the basket of being controlled by your smartphone is a scary thing to some people. But think about all the stuff you don't even need to think about buying as a result of smartphone technology.
And I don't think no one should disagree with that. Of course, it does make life easier if you were to use all of those things regularly anyway. But when everything is in this small handheld device that you have with you all the time, how much of your life are you spending involved with that device rather than experiencing everything that's happening around you?
Right. The antisocial impact, the tendency towards living in your phone, and just from a technological perspective, being overly reliant on one device. What happens when that device breaks? You've had a broken phone recently, Lewis, where the phone physically worked, but you couldn't make any calls or send text messages or get data, right? I mean, it was basically the phone worked, but it didn't really work.
Well, it basically turned into, at that point, it was just a computer that had Wi-Fi.
It was a Wi-Fi device.
Yeah.
And did that impact your day-to-day activities?
It did a little bit because I had to either have Wi-Fi or be at a computer if I wanted to be in contact with anyone.
Right.
And so it did hinder me a little bit, but I made it. I made it through.
Send me your thoughts about this. How do you weigh the pros and cons of increasingly ubiquitous and immersive smartphone technology? I think there's definitely a lot to be said for the doors it opens with regard to eliminating a lot of the stuff in our lives. Okay, today, instead of voicemails, I want to read some emails. Yesterday, we did the gender pay gap investigation video. The responses were absolutely all over the place. If you haven't seen it, check it out on YouTube. I'll read a few of the emails that we received about it in YouTube comments. Super J Brown on YouTube said, men get paid more because we do more, take less time off, and are more reliable and generally more physically capable. What an open-minded idea. Chris Coyne wrote in and said, thanks for this comprehensive analysis, David. I appreciate your objectivity. D.A. Scribbler on YouTube said, why is parity a goal worth working towards? I bet if you divide the population by any arbitrary categories, you'll find a disparity. Also, what about cases where the pay disparity is reversed? Denmark is widely lauded for having a gender pay gap favoring women. Is that really any better? We also heard from Kevin Durden, who said, good job taking a nuanced approach and remaining as unbiased as possible. As always, the reality is much more complicated. I also heard from Andrew Beaumont, who said, you know what's not helping close the gender pay gap? Repeating false information about the gender pay gap. Take note, feminists. I also received a message from Lord Ensker, probably not his real name. Men are just better at some things. For example, there has never been a woman in the top 10 in chess. Men are better at logic, which is needed in the higher paying jobs, banking, CEOs, management, while women are better at emotions, making them better at child caring. For example, schools, kindergarten teacher, which leads to lower income. Still, a good job at research from you guys. All right, a little bit of an odd perspective. And lastly, Victor Charlie saying, I'm not saying there is, but I say there should be a pay gap, because unlike woman, I guess he means women, money earned by men are somehow going to end up in women's hands anyway, because women don't pay for dinner, nor for sex, nor do they buy jewelry for men or gift men stuff that are worth something when resold. If you think that women don't pay for dinner, I invite you to go on a date with producer Louis Motamedi. That stereotype, Louis, will change very quickly, won't it?
You know, actually, I usually do pay for dinner. I just, occasionally it's nice not to.
All right, so a broad range of responses nonetheless, generally positive, a lot of negative just by the sheer number of responses we got. I think, Louis, mission accomplished with that video. I think it is a very, very good video to say, listen, both sides have been sticking to talking points that are bogus.
And it's interesting to see the amount of views on that video might be very similar to the videos that were published alongside it on that day, but the number of comments,
right,
far greater.
And I think ultimately the video will do very, very well on YouTube. On the bonus show today, Ted Cruz says, deport them all. There was no alien music heard by astronauts, contrary to popular belief in some circles. And Airbus files another interesting patent. All of those stories and more, davidpakman.com/membership. That is the only way to get access to the bonus show. And we will speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.